Hey, Jamie here, and welcome to our final module, Module 12, where we're going to break down financial freedom. And for this module, both parts 1 and 2, I recommend definitely have a journal or a notebook or something in front of you, whether it's physical for handwritten or if it's a Word doc or Google Doc or something. But you want to make sure that you're able to take notes, jot down any thoughts you have, as well as any questions that you have. Now, if you're taking this on your own, I recommend, of course, continue to do due diligence and more research to answer your questions and your thoughts. And if we're working one-on-one together, then that way, when we are talking, we're going to be able to go through all of your thoughts, your questions, and then tailor to how specifically could you begin to use these philosophies and strategies in your personal life. And the reason I'm so passionate about the financial freedom is so many people believe that they cannot become extraordinarily wealthy in the future, or they don't believe that they'll be able to retire early. They believe that they're going to have to work until they're 60 or 70 or 80, and they don't see what's possible for them because they don't understand how the financial freedom, what strategies work. How can they get to where they want to be by the time they're 40 or 50 or even earlier for certain people? So it is absolutely doable for you, and I want to break down in this first part the actual philosophies behind it. And taking a step back really quickly, the reason in anything that you're approaching in life, you always need to start with the philosophy. A philosophy is a framework for understanding whatever it is that you're focused on. And if you don't have a core understanding of the philosophy of something, then anybody could give you a strategy, it won't help. It's kind of like when people want to learn marketing, all of a sudden they start diving into, Facebook ads and all sorts of it's like they don't even understand how to communicate yet. You need to understand the philosophy of something before you can ever hope to use a strategy or a tool effectively. So just like those other examples, for your personal finances and thinking about financial freedom, in order to achieve it and know how to use the tools and the strategies, you first must have a really solid understanding of the philosophy for building financial freedom. So in this first part, we're going to understand what is the definition of financial independence as well as financial freedom, because I like to say that those are two different things, and we'll talk about that. And then understand the path to financial freedom is through consistent long-term investing in cash-generating investment assets, not compensation. So as much money as you make, you're not going to earn as much as you could make through your investments. And I'll be able to show you why that is. So we're also going to understand the difference between an investment asset and an investment liability. We're going to understand the relationship between risk and return. We're going to cover the 3 core strategies for reducing risk while still capturing returns. We're going to understand the difference between speculative and value-based investing. We're going to understand the difference between price appreciation, capturing value, and creating value. We're going to understand the importance of time, consistent investment, and compounding returns, and you'll be blown away at how the outcomes that you can create through a long-term period or a long-term investment horizon, consistent investment for every period, and watching the returns compound, it will blow your mind. And then understand the philosophy of waterfall financial management for personal finances. So this is kind of the philosophy that I've created for not only my own personal investments, but whenever I inform other people about how to think about their personal finances. So waterfall financial management, I think you'll find that extremely helpful. And understand the difference between security, growth, and dream buckets for investments. Now, I want to include again in here that I'm a coach. I'm here to provide information. Anything that I say, anything that I show you, anything that I inform you on, it's for information. I'm not here to tell you what to do, what investments to make, anything like that. That is not my purpose. You must make your own investment decisions about your money, about your life, about your future. So again, my disclaimer is I'm not a doctor, a nutritionist. I'm not a fitness instructor, a therapist, a psychologist, a wealth manager, a wealth advisor, or any other type of licensed practitioner. I'm a coach. Now, I am a certified coach, And my goal is to provide you with information and training. So it's still your responsibility to determine what is relevant, helpful, and worthwhile for your life and career. And all decisions and actions are solely your responsibility. As much as I wish I could say, do this, at the end of the day, it's your life and you must do what's best for you. All right. So I want to start with the definitions for financial independence and financial freedom. So for financial independence, and actually before I dive into this, I want to bring up the fact that most people believe that finance is too difficult. They believe that because I didn't study finance in college, or because I'm not a finance person, that it's too hard, it's too difficult, it's too complex to learn how to or what to do with my money, so I'm just going to pay other people to do it. It is imperative. You must know what your money is doing. You must understand your own finances. And the moment you don't know what your money is doing and why, you're exposing yourself to high amounts of risk. And the moment you expose yourself to high amounts of risk, you're not going to build the future that you want. So, bear that in your mind when we're going through this stuff. This is not too complex for you. And especially if you're the type of person going through this course and this program with me, I promise you can master your personal finances. It just takes the courage and the willingness to want to and to put in the time to master it. Okay, so financial independence is the ability to pay for your cost of living with the cash flows generated by your personal resources and investments with little to no work required. So your cost of living is, think of that as just survival. So your food, your rent or mortgage payment, your insurance costs, transportation, groceries, just anything that you need for sustenance, the ability to live. When you are making enough cash flow from your investments, so your investments are paying you enough money to cover your cost of living, you have become financially independent. Now, financial freedom is when your personal resources and investments are generating enough return or enough cash flow for you that you can actually pay for your desired standard of living. So this is over and above what your cost of living is. So maybe this is vacations. Maybe this is going out to eat 3 times a week. Maybe this is buying luxury items, clothing or shoes or a more expensive car, anything that or charitable gifts. I mean, being able to give to charity over and above what you yourself need, what a gift. So financial freedom is an incredible goal to aim for, and it's absolutely possible with the right philosophies and strategy. So, and again, this is with little to no work required because your investments are what's paying you, not your day-to-day active work, the 9 to 5. All right, so why should we care about achieving financial freedom? Well, you'll stop making life and career decisions based on money. And instead, you'll begin to live and work for pleasure, purpose, and even more importantly, is passion. And you'll be doing things because you want to, not because you need to. The day that you can wake up and know, I can do whatever I want today. I can go volunteer for a day. I can travel for 3 to 6 months and not worry about anything. I can give money to my family or my friends who are in need because I have my own bases covered. I can start a business. I can write a book. I can pick up an instrument that I've always wanted to play. Like, your whole life opens up the moment that you have income generating assets that are able to pay for your cost of living or your desired standard of living. So it is absolutely possible, and it is such a worthwhile goal, not only for yourself and your family, but the ability to give back to other people, to the community, to charity, to travel, to invest in new skills and new knowledge, to build things, to create things. All of that becomes possible the moment that you're not tied to money. So I want to go through several studies that I think are just bewildering to know that our education, and this isn't just the U.S., I mean, this study was just the U.S., but in terms of globally, the lack of education that is required for personal finances and wealth generation is astounding. So in this study, Fidelity Investment in 2019 interviewed thousands of people and they were across all ages. So from boomers to Gen X to I believe it's Gen Z and millennials, and ask, how well do you understand your personal finances and have you planned? So you can see here in the top left, so more Americans considered themselves planners rather than having a go with the flow personality type. Yet a lack of retirement planning is prevalent among both. So 54% of respondents considered themselves proactive planners. So more than half of people said, oh yeah, I constantly make plans. I know what I'm doing with my life. And then 31% of respondents identified themselves as go with the flow. So I'll figure it out as I go. I'm going to wing life. What's even more interesting, and this is the top right, 70% of the people who said they were planners say they're confident about their financial health. And 57% of the people who consider themselves as go with the flow feel confident about their financial health. Well, how many of these planners or go with the flow people actually have a plan? And this is the bottom part. 76%, 3/4 of the people who consider themselves planners do not have a financial plan. 82% of the general population do not have a financial plan. And 90% of the people who consider themselves a go with the flow or I'll wing it, they don't have a financial plan. The vast majority of people in the world don't have a financial plan. And it's usually because they don't believe that they're smart enough, it's too complex, and that they can't figure it out, which is absolutely not true. So, a look at retirement planning by generation. So this is the top left again. A lack of planning spreads across all generations. So 79% of boomers are without a plan for retirement. And that's scary because these are the people who are already retiring or trying to retire, but they can't because they never had a plan. So you're seeing people at grocery stores who are 75 years old working grocery counters, or people who are in their 70s or 80s working and doing these labor-intensive jobs because they don't have the skills for a high income and a more computer-focused type work. A lot of the older generation, the boomers, they were very labor-intensive, or the skills that they previously had are now outdated. So they didn't have the financial plan to allow them to retire. So they had to re-enter the workforce or never be able to leave at all. And they're stuck doing labor-intensive jobs in their old age. It's sad. And it's devastating to see that. But it's all because of the lack of financial planning. Now, 81% of Generation X are without a plan for retirement, and 87% of millennials are without a plan. So again, the vast majority of people do not have any idea what's going on with their finances long term. Maybe they know that they're able to cover rent and such for the next 12 months, but in terms of knowing at what age, with how much money, and what lifestyle they're going to have 20 to 30 years from now, or 15 years from now, or hopefully even sooner, like 10 years from now, they have no plan in place. So 31% of boomers have been quoted saying, I've never thought of having to prepare a financial plan. And this is, if anything, this is a failure in the K through 12 education, as well as parental education, in terms of the importance of understanding financial planning and personal finances. So 45%, and this is the bottom here, 45% of millennials, so about half, I don't feel like I'm on the right track for retirement. So if you are currently in the position where you kind of laugh and you're like, yeah, this is me, I don't have a financial plan, that's okay, because know that you are in the majority. It's not a bad thing. The only bad thing would be, now that you know, not doing anything about it. That would be the bad part. And the other bad thing would be allowing your friends and your family to not figure this out. Once you're enlightened with the idea of what to do with money, if you have that knowledge, that crucial understanding of how to build a life of wealth and of comfort and of security, it's your duty to work with other people and to help them as well, and to understand how important it is. All right, so very few people achieve financial independence, and even fewer ever achieve financial freedom. And it's because that they don't understand how to build it. And the other common kind of myth is, well, if I had $1 million a year, I'd be fine. That's not true. High compensation does not equal financial freedom. And it's because of the decisions that people make in their lives and the lack of financial education. So, does it accelerate it? Absolutely, if you have the right philosophy and the right strategies. So, I've included a chart here on the bottom. So you can see the blue line, the bottom line. This is assuming that someone makes, let's say, $50,000 a year, and they invest 10%. So $5,000 annually is invested, and the return, so you can see where it says 30-year CAGR, so right here, 30-year CAGR of 8%. So CAGR means a compounded annual growth rate. So this means that if you were to look at how much money you have in year one, and then how much money you have in year 30, and then calculate the average return over that 30 years, you would be compounding your returns at 8%. So it really means you're making 8% on your money every single year. All right, so if you have a 30-year CAGR of 8%, you're investing $5,000 annually, you'd start off at year one with zero, and you'd end 30 years from now with $611,729. Now, what if you fueled that strategy with more money? You accelerated it. Well, at $80,000, so now let's assume you're making $80,000 salary, and you decide to invest 15%. So your annual investment is $12,000, and you're still making the 8%. Well, again, in year one, you'd start with zero, but you would more than double the amount of money that you have 30 years from now. So you'd have roughly $1.5 million. Now, you might be looking at these numbers and go, that is absolutely doable. I could definitely make $80,000 and invest 15%. I could definitely make $50,000 and invest 10%. Now, what if you're breaking six figures and you're making even more than that? Well, now let's assume that you're making $110,000 and you invest 20%. So you're investing $22,000, which still leaves you with roughly, what, $92,000? No. So that'd be 110, 90, $88,000 to live on. You can live very comfortably on $88,000. So now, again, let's look at 8% compounded annual over 30 years. You'd start at year one with zero, and you'd end with almost $2.7 million 30 years from now. That's the power of consistent compounded growth over the long term for your investments. So high compensation does not necessarily equal financial freedom, but it can accelerate it. Now, I want to use some examples of high compensation where things don't go well. So the median NFL salary, so that's football, is $860,000. And note that this is the median, but the average is $2.7 million. So of course, with average, there's going to be outliers where, there are some people, think of someone like a Tom Brady. They're making significantly more money than other people. So the average will be skewed, but still $860,000 or $2.7 million. That is a disgusting amount of money. It blows your mind to see people who make this much money and throw it all away because they don't know what to do with it. And then the median NBA salary is 2.9, so $3 million, and the average is $7 million. Again, there's outliers. Think of someone like a LeBron James or a Steph Curry. All right, so now 78% of NFL players go bankrupt within 2 years of retirement, and 60% of NBA players go bankrupt within 5 years of retirement. It's a perfect example of high compensation does not equal financial freedom. There are people out there who are making money in means that don't require financial education. But what's even scarier for these people is, especially with athletes. So compare an athlete's trajectory, their career path with someone like, someone who's working in business or operations or engineering, anything like that, a more traditional career path. Well, if you're using your physical body, your career path is actually, it's decelerating over time. It's getting worse over time. So it's kind of like an upside down curve. So you start off young. So between 10 to 20 years old, you're learning the skill, you're building your abilities. And then for a lot of sports athletes, from the time they're 20 to about 35 years old, that's their peak earnings for their entire life. And then by the time they're 35 or 40, they're either too old or they're being outcompeted in the sport and they're no longer that good and they get cut. Well, they only have then 10 to 15 years to make enough money to support them for the rest of their life. And that's why so many of these NFL and NBA and other, high income earning people that only work for 10 to 15 years, technically, if they don't know what to do with that money, they're screwed. And then they need to figure out something else to do to earn money. So for you, you're going to be consistently increasing in value over time because you're going to be learning new skills, developing new areas of knowledge, and increasing your experiences. So you will continue to become more valuable in your 30s than you were in your 20s, in your 40s than you were in your 30s, in your 50s than you were in your 40s, and so on and so forth. So in order to achieve what you want for financial freedom, for financial independence or freedom, it must start with you understand the philosophy. And then once you understand the core philosophy, then you need to understand some core strategies to help you get there, to implement the philosophy. And then it goes down to execution. It's systematic, consistent, long-term execution over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and you will absolutely get to where you want to be financially. So, consistent long-term investment into investment assets. So, this is where I want to talk about the difference between investment assets and investment liabilities. So, an investment asset is something that generates positive cash flow. It's paying you money. It is creating more money for you. And then secondly is it increases in value over time. And the third is it requires little to no work or time in the long term. Now, do all investments require little to no work? No. There's a difference between active investments and passive investments. So for example, I started building my own business. Well, that is absolutely an active investment. I'm consistently putting in many, many hours, 6 to 7 days a week in order to build my business. Well, that's active. But in this case, for this module, and what I want to focus on in terms of financial freedom is focus on passive investments that require little to no work or time over the long term. So if we were to think about cash flow, value, and the return on your investment, well, in an investment asset, it should be paying you money. In an investment liability, it's usually consuming money. It's a negative on your finances. And I'll give examples here shortly. Now, for value, the value of your investment asset should increase over time. Now, if an investment liability, well, the value of that is going to decrease over time. And for your investment asset, you should have a positive return. You should be making money or earning a return on your asset. But on a liability, an investment liability, you're actually losing money day after day, month after month, year after year. So many people mistake personal expenses for investments. So this is where it's very, very important to understand the difference between an investment asset and an investment liability, because a lot of people, because they don't know the fundamental difference, they believe they're doing what's best for the financial future, but they actually might not be. So, two examples are your home and your car. So, a huge stereotype that most people grow with is that the best possible investment you can make is your home. It's not. And we'll talk about that. And then your car. A lot of people believe that, I'm going to buy a car and, I'm owning something. Well, you're also losing money every day and instantly losing value. So in terms of a home, you're consuming cash because you are having to pay the mortgage. So, and I don't want to say it's a bad investment because, again, I'm not here to say what is or is not. I'm here to inform. So a home is oftentimes better than renting because in renting, you're paying for use. I can use this apartment or this condo for a year and I'm going to pay X amount of dollars for it. Well, after that year's up, you have nothing to show for it and you've lost money throughout the year. Well, at least if you have a home, you're at least building equity in something. You're actually building ownership in something. So that is one step better oftentimes than renting, because now there are certain cases where renting can be beneficial. But anyways, I'm getting derailed here. So your home is usually negative cash flow. You're not making money on your home. Now, the value of your home, you hope, and you're, over the long term. So if you have the same home for 30 years, in most cases, the value of that home is going to increase, assuming that it's a good location. Now, if you're in the middle of Timbuktu and all of the jobs in the economy leaves the local economy or wherever you're located, well, then yeah, your home value is going to plummet. If the economy, the business, local jobs are leaving your area. So your return on a home, it really does depend, because there's so many different factors influencing it, because you're so dependent on the value. And it's also cash flow negative because you're putting in money into the home. Maybe you're remodeling it, maybe you're redoing a room, you're buying more furniture. So there's a lot of expenditures for your home. Now, your car. A car should never be thought of as an investment. It is a horrible investment, but it's useful. And that's why it is a useful expense. So your car absolutely does not return positive cash flows for you. You're paying consistently for repairs, for maintenance, for gas, for oil changes. It's pretty much like every single mile that you drive your car, you're losing money. And now the value of your car, well, if you buy a brand new car, the moment you drive it off the lot, it now goes from new to used, and you literally lose like half to a third of the value instantly. It's crazy. And then certain cars retain their value better than other cars. So now either way, like over the long term, as your car gets older and older and older, well, new cars on the market are going to have better technology, better fuel efficiency, and better everything. So the older your car gets, the more outdated it becomes, the more the value plummets. So the return on your investment in the car is deeply negative. All right, so what are some examples of positive cash flowing and value increasing assets, investment assets? Well, a rental asset. Now, the reason I say a rental asset is there's so many different things that you can rent. So owning something and allowing someone else to use it, well, that generates positive cash flow. Now, the most obvious example that many of us are aware of, and I'm sure you're aware of, is, well, people buy homes or apartments and then rent them to other people. Well, you could also buy a computer and rent it to a friend for $20 per day. I mean, making money off of renting something, the only thing it requires is you own something and you allow someone else to use it, and they pay you a certain amount of money over a certain period of time to use it, and you make a return on that. Now, in terms of company ownership, well, you can buy stock in businesses, which is really like buying a slice of a business. So how you can think about a stock is, imagine Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola is a business, and that business, the ownership can be sliced up into 100 pieces, 1,000 pieces, 1,000,000 pieces, 10 million pieces, and regardless of how many pieces it's sliced up into, each piece is a stock. And people can invest in Coca-Cola by buying a piece of the business, which is a stock. Or what people can do is they lend money to businesses or to governments. So there's different types of loans and bonds, which is all that means is, let's say that you have $100, you give someone else $100 for a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, and you're saying that, well, I'm going to charge you 3% interest or 5% interest. Well, let's say that it's 5% interest for 1 year. Well, that person, actually, to make numbers easy, let's say 12% interest because there's 12 months in a year. Let's say that you say, I'm going to let you borrow $100 for 12% interest for 1 year. Well, what that person is going to do is they're going to pay you $1 every single month, because in terms of monthly interest payments, they're going to take the annual interest amount, divide it by 12, and that's how much they need to pay you per month. So if you've ever seen like your credit card APRs or your interest rates or your student loan interest rates, you might see like credit cards that says 20% or 25%. And for your student loans, maybe it says 3% or 4% or 5%, 6%. In terms of how much you pay per month, you want to take that total annual percentage, divide it by 12, and that's what you're paying monthly in terms of interest. Okay, so if you're lending someone else money, whether it's a business or an individual, and they're paying you interest, you're earning cash because they're paying you cash payments. So you're earning money on that. All right. Excuse me. So now the way that we can look at these in terms of do they provide cash flow and value? Well, if you own something and you're allowing someone else to use it, so in this case, we're going to use a home, a rental home. Well, cash flow is positive because someone else is paying you rent. So maybe you bought the home and your mortgage payment is only $1,000, but you're renting it out to somebody for, say, $1,400 or $1,500. Well, in terms of monthly cash flow, you're going to be earning $400 to $500 in positive cash flow. And then as well, your hope is if you hold this house or this apartment or condo or whatever it is, this property long term for say 10, 15, 20 years, is the value of the house is also going to increase. So you have positive cash flow, positive value, which means you're going to be earning a positive return on your investment. This is a great example of an investment asset. But then you also have stocks and bonds or loans. Well, you're lending someone else your money, so you are generating positive cash flow. The value of a stock should go up over time, assuming that the business is growing and generating money. Now, if you lend someone money like a bond or a loan, the value won't increase because that's assuming you hold it all the way to the end. So if you let someone borrow $100 from you, well, they're only going to pay you $100 back at the end of the year. But throughout the year, you've been generating cash flow because of the interest payments. So, and then I have a little asterisk here for the value. So the reason I'm saying positive value increase for stocks is because that's assuming you've diversified your investment across many, many, many different companies. And we'll talk more about why diversification is important for long-term value increasing for stocks. So the whole idea behind this investment asset versus investment liability is you want to allocate less money to expenses and investment liabilities and allocate more money to investment assets. That's a core philosophy. So there's only two ways to earn a return on investment. And it's either your investment is increasing in value, so the price of the asset is increasing, or you're generating positive cash flow. And there's three different ways, and this comes from Sam Adams' Wealth of Nations, but and it's in so many different ways economies are built on cash flow. So there's only three ways to generate cash flow: profit, interest, and rent. Profit is when you own something that is generating a profit and you own a piece of the profit. So, for example, if you own your own business, you're the only person in the business. Well, if you make a profit, you keep all of it. Or let's say that you own a stock, like that Coca-Cola stock. Well, if you own one slice of that stock and Coca-Cola makes a profit that year, well, they're going to be paying out profit to the owners. So you get a piece of the profit. You get a piece of that pie. Now, interest is also positive generates positive cash flow. And this is when you lend money to other people, they pay you interest payments over time. And then rent is another way, which is you own something, you allow someone else to use it for a certain period of time, and they pay you X amount for the usage of whatever that asset is. Some investments benefit from both. And that was the example that we just went over. You have many different options of different types of investments that benefit from one or benefit from both. So what are some different investments that you could kind of think through in terms of cash flow and value? Well, stocks. Everybody talks about public equities or the stock market. Well, if you diversify, and again, the key here is diversification, and we'll talk more about how do you manage risk later on in this part 1. But this is assuming that you're diversified across many, many different companies. Cash flow will be positive because those companies are generating a profit and paying out dividends to you, which is they're sending you literally checks of profit to you. And then value will increase because as those companies grow over time, over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, the value of those stocks will increase. Now, bonds. Are you going to be generating a positive cash flow? Yes, because someone or a business is paying you, or it could be an individual, a business, or a government. And in terms of government, there's treasury stocks or federal bonds, federal loans. So those are treasuries, but then there's also municipal or local government or state government bonds and loans that you can invest in. So either the national government can be paying you. You can even invest in international government bonds. I mean, if you wanted to, if you're in America, you can invest in Japanese government bonds or Chinese government bonds or European different countries within Europe. Like, you can loan money to pretty much anyone you want in the world. It's crazy. So you can lend money, and that person, whether it's a government, a business, or an individual, someone you know, family, friend, or someone else that you find online, you can lend them money and they will pay you interest payments. So generate positive cash flow. But then in terms of value, the value will not increase because, and that's assuming that you're holding it all the way to maturity, which means that if it's a 10-year bond, you're holding it for 10 years. If you're loaning money to someone for 1 year, you're waiting all the way until the end of the year when they pay you the full amount back that you initially lent them. All right. So now a rental asset. So you buy something and you allow someone else to use it. Is it going to generate cash flow? Yes. Is the value going to increase? Well, it depends on what the actual asset is. So for example, if it's real estate or property, well, over the long term, more often than not, that price will increase. The value will increase. But let's say that you own a car. You buy a car and you're renting it out to other people to use. Well, it's going to generate positive cash flow, but the value of the car will decrease over time. So in terms of cash flow and value for a rental asset, it depends. And now a private business. So this could be a business that you own yourself and you're actively, or this could be you investing in a friend or a family or some other private business. Is it going to generate cash flow? Well, that's assuming that the business is doing well, that's actually making a profit and making money. Then yes, it'll generate cash flow. And then in terms of the value, assuming again that the business is growing and it's doing well and it's continuing to expand, then the value will also increase. And then private lending. So is that going to generate cash flow? Yes, because of the interest payments. Will the value increase? No, because you're only going to receive at the end of the loan the initial amount of money that you allowed someone else to use. So if that's $100, you get $100 back at the end. All right, so why is investing considered to be so difficult? Because unless you're informed, skilled, and experienced, it's difficult to, and I would say it's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult to accurately time and call whether an investment's price will go up or down in the short term. So if you've ever listened to Warren Buffett or Ray Dalio or any of the world's best and really history's best investors, they all tell you the same thing. We cannot predict the future. We do our best, but we cannot. So many of the world's best investors, they're not focused on speculating and trying to make money, a really large amount of money in the next 3 months or 6 months or 1 year. Someone like Warren Buffett, he only buys businesses that he wants to hold and stay invested in for more than 10 years or longer. And really his principle is, why would I buy a business if I don't plan on owning it forever? So the best investors in the world are not focused on price, and they're not focused on timing or calling something in the short term. Instead, they're looking for really quality, valuable investments that they know over the long term, over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, will generate positive cash flow and increase in value in the long term. So most people believe that they need to pick a stock and that, oh, well, this company's doing really well right now and I'm just going to put money in and I hope it's going to do well. That's not a strategic investment. That's speculative, and more often than not, it's just gambling. So most people are speculative, and what that means is they don't know really whether or not they're going to make money in the future. They're hoping that the price will go up. Hope is not a strategy, and it never will be. So you cannot speculate. And if you do, you're exposing yourself to losing the money that you need to invest to compound to generate more money. A lot of people say that, well, I'll never be rich and I'll never be wealthy because I don't have money to start with. And the only way to become wealthy is to have money to start with. Well, that's not true. In order to become wealthy or rich financially, you need to compound your money over the long term and not lose money along the way. The reason most people never achieve their wealth goals or the rich life, if you will, or financial freedom in the future is because they've been losing money along the way because they're gambling. They're betting on prices going up when really they don't have a strategy. They're just hoping and praying the price continues to go up. So that's speculative. They're betting on the future and they're playing a zero-sum game of poker with the world's best. Now, what I want to kind of bring up here as an example is if let's say that you're betting on Amazon or Facebook or Coca-Cola or Procter & Gamble or, you pick the company. If you put a large amount of your money into one specific stock, what you're saying is you're betting that that price will go up. Well, the only reason that you're able to buy the stock in the first place is because someone else is selling it. That's all the stock market is. It is a buy and a sell marketplace. If nobody's selling, you literally can't buy stock in something. You can't buy it. It's a marketplace. For every buyer, there's a seller. So that's what I mean by a zero-sum game. If you win, it means someone else loses. And if someone else loses, it means that you win. So if you're taking one individual bet on a company or a stock, and you're putting a large amount into one specific company or several specific companies, you're taking a really strong bet on those companies, which means that you're on one side of the bet and someone else is on the opposite side of the bet because they're the ones selling you the shares. So most of the liquidity or most of the stocks being bought and sold in the world are being bought and sold by professional investors or teams of professional investors. So you, assuming that you don't work at one of those financial firms or an accredited financial, assuming you're not an accredited investor or working at one of the leading financial investment firms, you are most often going to be considered a retail investor, which means that maybe you're investing, several $1,000s, a couple thousand, tens of thousands, or a couple hundreds of thousands. But these institutional investors are investing hundreds of millions, tens of millions, billions, massive amounts of money. And they're the ones on the opposite side of the bet from you. So these people work 6 to 7 days a week, 80 to 100 hours a week, focused on these investments, picking individual companies for the short term. And they have billions of dollars of resources. So they have teams of hundreds of financial analysts and people who live, eat, and breathe this stuff every single day. And they have, literally billions of dollars worth of technology. And they're running algorithms 24/7 to absorb and digest all of the world's information to give them better insights into their short-term investments and what bets to make and the probabilities and the statistical probabilities of those outcomes in those investments. That's who you're up against when you're trying to individually pick one stock or one individual specific asset. And if it's a public market and you're betting against the institutional investors. Now, am I saying that you shouldn't? No, it's your life. You must make your own investment decisions, but you need to know who you're betting against because it's very important to understand It's a zero-sum game of poker, and you're playing with the world's best. All right. So when most people focus on price in the short term, they're often making speculative, emotional decisions. So, some news alert or something pops out and they get excited about it, and then they believe that, oh, this company is going to lead the future and they're cool, so I'm going to take all my money, or not all my money, but I'm going to take money and just buy it. Well, more often than not, they're hoping the price will go up in the short term, and they're also making an emotional decision. It was not strategic. It was not well thought out. One of the questions you should always ask yourself before making an investment is, how do I know that this is a good investment? And if the reason that pops up in your mind is because other people told me so, your red flag should go up, because it means that you have not done your own research. You haven't made your own investment decision. You're making an emotional decision to follow the crowd. And that always, or very, very often, will lead you into dangerous areas. So instead, what we want to focus on is cash flows, something that in a positive investment asset that generates positive cash flows over the long term, and or being able to buy an investment asset at below market value price. So if you know with absolute certainty that something is worth roughly $90 to $100, well, if the opportunity presents itself where you're able to buy that asset for 70 to 80, well, you're very confident, call it 90 to 100% confident that you're buying it below its actual value. Well, that's not speculative. That's strategic, because you know the true value and you found a bargain in the marketplace. All right, so in summary, short-term investing requires massive amounts of skill and timing and experience, and I would also say resources. But in terms of long-term investing, how can you as a retail investor, as a small investor, achieve your financial freedom goals? It takes consistency, and it takes compounding your investments over the long term, over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So assuming we're not in the top 1% of the world's best investors, it is highly advisable that we, and the reason I'm saying we is I myself am included in this. I'm a retail investor. I'm not managing tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. Like, those institutional investors influence everyone. So for us, we should focus on long-term, consistent, and compounding investment returns. So we're not speculative and betting and hoping that the price will go up or down. Instead, we can look out 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and with certainty and confidence say, I will have more money. I know it because I have a strategic, consistent long-term plan that I'm following. We want to be a value investor, and that's really what a value investor does. They make long-term decisions and then implement a long-term, consistent compounding investment strategy. All right, so the three ways that we can do this is we can generate positive cash flow through profit, rent, and interest, which we've already talked about. We can create value, and we can create value either actively or passively. And usually when you're creating value, it usually requires active investment. So this could be through the sweat and our own labor, so us actually working to create value in something. So an example would be me building my business. That is very labor intensive. Or you working to create let's say you're writing a book, or you're creating a product, or you're building something that you then sell. Well, you created value through your labor. But then you could also create value through money. So if you're investing in something and that money can be used to improve the value of something, well, then you can increase the value of that investment asset. And then information. You can contribute information to something, and with that information, the value will increase. So now, several examples. So labor, we've already said, you're actively working or building or creating something that is valuable. So that's labor. Now money. Let's say that you have $10,000 and you take this $10,000 and give it to someone who knows how to use that $10,000 efficiently and effectively to create more value from it. So this could be lending money to somebody. This could be investing money into someone or something. So maybe it's a rental. Let's go back to property investments, like a house, just because it's so easy for everyone to understand. So for you to understand. So let's say that you take $10,000 and you put that into the house. Well, that's going to require a little bit of labor, but it's also going to require money. And let's say you put in that $10,000, you remodel a part of the house, and now the house is worth $15,000 or $20,000 more. Well, you put $10,000 in, and now you returned, or it's now worth 15 or 20 grand more. So you made a positive return in terms of you created value. And now in terms of information, one way that you can do this is you will have skills and knowledge and experience that other people will not have. So you can work in tandem with other people. So maybe someone else provides the money and you're the one providing the skills, knowledge, or information, and you're providing information value. And together, between the other person's physical resources like money and labor and your information, you can actually create something of value. So a lot of people later on, when they're a subject matter expert in whatever they do, they can become consultants and they're creating value through their knowledge. And so now the third point is capturing value, which is when you're very confident that you're buying something, an investment asset, for less than its true worth, its true market value. You're paying below market value. So kind of breaking these down in terms of what does the return look like? Well, generating cash flow, whether through profit, rent, or interest, is going to require an initial outlay of cash, an initial investment. So this is you buying something for $100, which means it's a negative cash outflow of $100. Or you're lending someone money for $100, so it's a negative cash outflow of $100. Well, you have a negative cash outflow, but over time, you're going to be gaining positive cash flow over time. So this could be through interest payments. This could be from someone renting whatever it is that you're allowing them to use and they're paying you for that usage. Or it could be profit from a business or from something else that's generating a profit and it's consistently paying you cash over time. Well, if this continues indefinitely, well, you're going to be, over the long term, creating positive cash flow. Now, what about value creation? Well, this is slightly different than generating cash flow because in value creation, you're still going to have a negative investment or an initial negative investment, cash outlay, or a time outlay, or an energy investment. And you're going to have to continue investing into something in order to create that value. So you're investing more labor and work, or you're investing more money into something, or you're investing more information into something, but it's going to increase the value of the thing, and maybe you sell that investment asset later on and capture the return. So you have an initial investment, you then have to invest even more into it, and then at the end, after all of your investment, the value of that asset is worth more. And you can either hold on to it, and then maybe you begin to rent it and generate cash flow, or maybe now because the value is higher, you then sell it for a profit. Okay, so now the third is capturing value. So paying below market value for something. So now let's assume that market value is this dashed line on the left. Well, if you're able to buy something for 20% less than market value, well, then your return on investment is going to be 20% because you captured the 20%. If you buy something for, and I love using Jeeps because Jeeps retain their value pretty well. So like, let's say that you buy a Jeep for, or you know that a Jeep that you currently see is worth, it's selling for $10,000. Well, if it's selling for $10,000, but you know, because you've done the research, you're very familiar with Jeeps, you understand the marketplace for Jeeps, well, you know that it could be sold for, call it $14,000 or $15,000. Well, if you buy it for $10,000 and you know with a very strong sense of confidence, you can then resell it for $14,000 or $15,000. Well, your return on investment is going to be $4,000 to $5,000 because you paid below market value. You captured that value. And that's really all. If you ever hear the word arbitrage really just means that you're taking advantage of mispriced assets. So you buy something for $10,000 in one place, and then you go somewhere else and sell it for $15,000. So maybe you buy a Jeep that is being sold for $10,000 in California, and then you buy that Jeep, you bring it back, and let's say you're in Chicago, and then you sell it for $15,000 in Chicago. Well, that's technically arbitrage, but really all you're doing is you're capturing value. So, the man, Warren Buffett. So, his rules for making money, and I love this, his rule number 1 is never lose money. And his rule number 2 is never forget rule number 1. Why? Why is this such an important rule to Warren Buffett? Well, the reason for it is because, let's say you have $100. If you lose 50% of your money at the bottom here, so let's say that you start with $100 here, this red line, and you lose 50%, well, how much are you now at? You now have $50. Well, in order to go back to your initial $100, you need to go from $50 to $100. You need to make a 100% return on your money. And that is very difficult to do. So, a lot of people, so if we think back to the Great Recession, so think back to 2008, 2009, 2010, a lot of people when that Great Recession hit, even coronavirus, when coronavirus hit, a lot of people had their investments, the markets tanked, a lot of people got really, really scared and started selling because they just wanted cash. They just want their money out. They don't want to lose money. Well, they sell here. So they've lost 10, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%. They've lost an enormous amount of their investment. And then they sell. They lock in their losses. And then usually the market will rebound. And in the way that the market works is it doesn't just consistently climb back day after day after day after day after day until eventually it comes back. It's usually the market works in giant leaps and bounds. So in one day, the market, so let's say that the market falls 50%. Well, in one day, the market might recover 20%. And then it stays stagnant or maybe goes up and down and it's kind of stagnant. And then, one day, a month later, it jumps another 10%. The market is so unpredictable and it has really aggressive days. So when someone pulls out their money and locks in this loss, it's almost guaranteed that they're not going to be able to time the market and they're going to miss those really big jump days, which means that they lock in a 50% loss and then they miss the market recovery. And because they missed the market recovery, they're stuck down here and now they have to reinvest $50 and try to make 100% just to get back to where they were. And this is why Warren Buffett says, never lose money and hold your assets for a long-term period of time. Because the moment you get emotional and start buying and selling and buying and selling and buying and selling, you're trying to play this game, you're going to lose. Even professional investors do not win this game very often. And that's why they have to take very strategic hedged bets. So we want to invest for the long term. Don't sell when everything starts tanking because, and going back to coronavirus. So in coronavirus, when the markets plunged 30, 40, 50%, a lot of people sold. And then they were worried that it was going to keep falling. So when the market started recovering, they still hesitated to buy. And then when the market recovered, they were still down 40, 50%. Well, how long is coronavirus going to last? Well, markets recovered within about 8 months. And if someone had in that, so when in March 2020 was when the initial plunge for coronavirus was. If someone was not emotional, if they had said, why am I invested? Am I invested because I'm worried about losing this money in the next few months? Or am I investing this money so that 20 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 5 years from now, I'm able to retire or consistently make money on this? The reason people sell is because they're emotional or why most people sell, not all people, but the reason most people sell is because they're emotional. They're making short-term decisions based out of fear or greed, and you cannot let that happen to you. You must focus on long-term, long-term, long-term. Whenever you catch yourself feeling emotional or everyone else is doing this, so I must do this, you want to stop and say, why is my money invested? And does the next 6 months even remotely impact my strategy? More often than not, it's no. You're focused on 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now. Do not allow yourself to get caught in the emotional craziness that is the stock market, the economy, etc. Focus, focus, focus on the long term. All right, so, and we'll talk about not losing money and managing risk, because that's two principles here. One is always be focused on long-term, consistent returns. But then the second is manage risk, which we'll talk about right now. So managing risk. Assuming you have $100, would you rather have a 50-50 chance of earning or losing $100, or would you rather have an 80-20 chance of earning, losing $20? So in the first scenario, you have a 50% chance of earning $100 or a 50% chance of losing $100. Or in the second scenario, you have an 80% chance of winning $20 or a 20% chance of losing $20. Which would you choose and why? So maybe pause the video and jot down in your journal or something, think through which of these would I choose and actually try to answer why. Think strategically. Why would you choose one over the other? All right, so now assuming that you've spent a couple minutes thinking through this, now let's break this down. So strategically, one is absolutely the better decision from a risk and a probability and statistical outcome. So in terms of the 50-50, if you only have $100 and you're betting $100 on a 50-50 outcome, well, you only get one chance. You only get one bet. And you're either going to lose $100 or win $100. If you lose $100, you are SOL, because you've now lost the money that you need to invest to make more money. So your outcome is either 0 or 200. And the emotions, how you're going to feel when you're making this investment, is you're going to feel fear, uncertainty, stress, anxiety, and you're going to lose a lot of sleep because you're worried, you're nervous, you're scared. What if I lose all my money? This is how most people are playing the game. Most people live their life in fear and anxiety with their finances because they don't have a strategy, and they're hoping, and they're also not managing their risk. They're usually playing what they believe to be a 50-50 game. Now, for the 80-20, let's talk about why this is strategic and why this is how we want to think about best allocating our money for investment assets. So if we're only making a $20 bet, but we have $100 total, well, that means that 20 times 5, we have 5 different bets. We can invest in 5 different scenarios. We get 5 chances to make money. Well, if we also know that we're going to make money 80% of the time and lose 20% of the time, well, that means that in our first chance, we're going to make 20. In our second chance, we're going to make 20, third, 20, fourth, 20. But then 1 out of these 5 chances, we're going to lose $20. Well, that's okay, because that means that for the outcome-wise, we're going to make, that should actually be 180, not 160. So the outcome here should be 180, not 160, because you're going to start with $100. You're going to make 20, so 120, 140, 160, 180. Never mind, it is 160. I was right. When I was creating this slide. So 160 is your outcome. And then for the emotions, in terms of when you're making this investment, you're going to feel calm, certain, confident. You're going to have peace of mind, and you will sleep like a baby because you know that this will always work for you going forward. This is strategic, long-term, risk-managed investment. And that's what we want to focus on. That's the philosophy that we want to build for our financial futures. So to never lose money, you must focus on risk management. And nothing is more destructive to your wealth building than losing money. And again, just going back to our boy Warren Buffett, this is why we can't lose money. This is why his rule number 1 is never lose money, and his rule number 2 is never ever forget rule number 1. The moment you lose money, you've destroyed your wealth building. So a good outcome is earn a smaller, lower risk returns that compound consistently over the long term. Yes, that's what we want, but we can juice that up a little bit. But then versus earn a larger high risk return that risks destroying the only money you have to invest in compound. So if we had to choose between these two, either earn a smaller, lower risk return that compounds consistently over the long term and not lose money, we'd want to choose this over this one because this is risky and you're risking losing the only money that you have to invest in compound. So if we had to choose between these two, we'd choose number one. But what's great is earn a larger return that compounds consistently over the long term while managing your risk exposure. Because this allows us to still earn decent money, good money on our money, over the long term, consistently, because we're managing risk. So now let's talk about how we do that. How you can manage your risk, and again, this is the core philosophy. This is by understanding the philosophy, there's many different strategies, but you got to understand the base philosophy. And the base philosophy is you want to turn your 50-50 risk exposures into a greater than 50% chance of making money and a less than 50% chance of losing money. So at the end of the day, you're making more money more often than you're losing money. You're making money more often than you're losing money over the long term consistently. And the example that we just gave in this other slide is the 80% chance of winning $20 and the 20% chance of losing $20. Which brings us to, how do casinos make money consistently? If you think about their business model, all they do is bet all day, every day, for years, decades, centuries. How do they make money? How do they not lose bets? Well, it's simple. So they're playing a game where, and I'll bring roulette here as an example. They have a wheel that you spin, and it goes from 1 to 36. And the American roulette wheel, so U.S. rules, you can see here it says U.S. rules, 00 roulette. So in America, we have both a single zero in our casinos on the roulette table as well as a 00. Now, most European roulette tables are single zeros, so they only have one. So odds are even worse for us in the U.S. when you're playing roulette. So if you think about it, the red, black, odd, or even. So if you spin the wheel once and say, all right, I'm putting my money, I'm betting on red. I'm going to bet $100 on red. Well, a lot of people walking in, they actually believe that it's a 50-50% chance of getting black or red. But it's not, because there's a single zero and a 00, which skews it. Well, when it skews it, your bet on red or black, or let's say odd or even, you bet on odd or even, what you thought was a 50-50% chance is not truly a 50-50% chance. It's actually a 47.37% chance because there's a single zero and a 00. There's two extra digits on this board that are not red or black and not odd or even. There's zeros. So what that means is your probability is less than 50% and the house edge is really 5.26%. So their likelihood, the casino's likelihood of winning is 55.26%. Or I'm sorry, 52.74%. Yeah, because they're going to be above 50%. They're greater than 50%, and you are less than 50%. And if you recall back to here, the whole goal is you want to make money greater than 50% of the time, and you want to lose money less than 50% of the time. That's all a casino's doing. And if you think about it, in terms of times, well, maybe you take all of your money and you bet once. Well, you might make a killing because you only bet once and you were really lucky, and that 47.3% chance, you did win. But if you spin 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 100,000 times, who can you guarantee is going to win? The casino. And that's why casinos don't want you to come in and bet, $1 million once. They don't want that because they might get screwed on that. So that's why a lot of betting tables actually have betting limits. So you might go to a craps table or a roulette table or a blackjack table or something, and they actually have betting limits because they understand the probabilities and they know how their business model, their profit model. They don't want you to play once. They want you to bet 1,000 times. They want you to bet 500 times because they know they will beat you in the long term. And this is the game that you want to play. So casinos never, ever, ever play a 50-50 game with you. And that's how they make money, and that's how they are in profit in business for thousands of years. Casinos have been around since ancient Greeks and, even further back before that with the Chinese empires. Like, casinos have always existed, gambling's always existed, and whoever's leading the gamble, very rarely are they ever playing a 50-50 game. And neither should we. Neither should you. Your money should always be, over the long term, making more money than it loses, more often than it loses. So we have 3 core strategies for managing your risk for your money. The first is diversification. The second is creating a safety margin. And the third is hedging. So let's break these down and let's start with diversification. So in the simplest terms possible, diversification means you're reducing risk in your investment by spreading it across multiple investments. So I'm sure growing up, you probably heard people say, don't put all your money in one basket. All they were saying is diversify. That's really all it means. So similarly, if we were to think about how does this relate to public stocks or public equities or even bonds, a bond portfolio, etc., or multiple private companies, etc., all you're doing is you're playing the same game as the casinos. You're saying, I'm not going to bet once. I'm not going to spin the wheel once. It's too risky. But instead, I know that if I have an edge and I'm making money more than 50% of the time, I'm going to spin the wheel 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 100 times, because I know I'm going to win if I spin it a large number of times. Well, for diversification in terms of investments and in your personal finances, well, it's the same way. If you're betting on one company, that's like spinning the roulette wheel once. That company is going to go up or down. It's a 50-50. It's either going to increase in value or decrease in value. But if you invest in over 100 companies, well, assuming that the whole nation isn't falling apart or the whole industry isn't falling apart, well, more often than not, companies are going to grow. So in this example, let's say this is the entire S&P 500, which it is. So S&P 500 by market cap. You can see that's what this is. So this is the entire S&P 500. Well, this pretty much represents the entire U.S. business and economy. Well, I know that with certainty that over the long term, the U.S. will grow, or at least, I'm 90+% sure that the U.S. will grow. So, have nations fallen in the past? Yes, but, hopefully, for all of our sakes, if you're in the U.S. and anyone else who's financially invested in the U.S., you don't want that to happen. So, but historically, looking at the past S&P 500 over the last 100+ years, 200+ years, this over the long term, our businesses, our economy has grown, which means that out of these 500 companies, more than 50% of them will increase in value and generate positive cash flow, and less than 50% of them will fall apart and lose value and lose money and cease to exist. So by diversifying across a large number of companies, over the long term, you're going to make money more than 50% of the time and lose money less than 50% of the time. So in terms of diversification across the S&P 500, so if we were to look at the last 93 years, so as far back as data and the S&P 500 can go back to, so 1927 in December, well, over the last 93 years, the compounded annual growth rate across all of these 500 businesses has grown by 5.9%. Well, that gives us pretty strong confidence and certainty that going forward, over the long term, if we diversify across this group of companies, we're going to make money. And this is over the last 93 years, we made money with a return of 5.9%. All right, so that's 93 years. Well, what about looking back 51 years? And this was as of December 2020. So when I pulled this data, it was December 2020. So looking back 51 years, well, same thing. Across the group of investments, these 500 companies, they returned a compounded annual growth rate of 7.48%. Well, what about 31 years back? Well, compounded annual growth rate of 7.83%. In the last 21 years, so from 99 to 2020, a compounded annual growth rate of 4.43%. Now, a lot of people will realize, all right, well, why does it tank from, 7.4 and 7.83 all the way all of a sudden down to 4.43? Well, that's because if you look at this price chart or this S&P 500 value chart, you can see that in 99, it was right about here, and there was what was called the lost decade. And the lost decade was in, if you remember at the end of 99 or early 2000s, there was the internet spike and the tech spike. But then the market fell apart for the next year or two. And then it slowly but surely started recovering. And then it finally recovered back in about 2007-ish, 2006-ish to where it was in 99, 2000. So if you had invested money here, you really did lose a decade because you didn't really make any money. So this is what was called the lost decade. But now going forward, then we had the Great Recession here where market fell apart and then it rebounded. And then over the last 11 years, so you can see here 2009 was the bottom of the Great Recession, and then we recovered. And so from 2009 all the way back to where December 2020, you can see here this is the bottom of the recession, recovered, and we had an 11-year or pretty much 10-year bull market, which means it just kept growing. There was no slides, there was no recessionary, and it wasn't until, end of 2018, early 2019, where you had a slight recession, but it wasn't even, it was more of a dip, but then it quickly recovered. But then we had coronavirus. And you can see the mass, the incredible drop the coronavirus had. But look at how quickly it recovered. So markets will fall, markets will recover. So as long as we are a long-term investor, we can see the recoveries. So when everyone became super emotional during the coronavirus fall, or even in the Great Recession fall, a lot of people started selling. But they were selling investments that they were planning on holding for like 10 years, 20 years. And it's craziness because they forgot their long-term perspective. They forgot that the market will recover over the long term. So they locked in their losses and then they missed the run-up and then they locked in losses. And they had to try to recover 100% to gain their 50% back. All right, so diversification is we like diversification. It is our friend. This is how we make solid returns over the long term while managing risk. So for diversification, we don't know which specific investments or specific companies will go up in the short term. Now, if you're going to make a call or a bet on one specific company or investment, that's where you're playing poker with the world's best investors because they're trying to do the exact same thing with a lot more analysts, a lot more money, and a lot more resources, and just a lot more skill and experience. So what we do know is the group of investments will go up in the long term. So as long as we diversify, we are very confident that more than 50% of those companies will make money and will lose money on less than 50% of them. So over the long term, we will compound and grow our investment. So by diversifying, we spread our risk and capture the return of the group of the investments, or of the return of the group of investments. All right, so now we have the second core strategy for managing risk, which is safety margin. So this one's a lot easier to understand and immediate. I'm sure you're going to catch this very quickly, but all you're doing is you're reducing risk by creating a margin for error. Now, a margin for error, and this is just financial speak, but even a margin for error is, let's say that you need to go to a friend's place and you tell your friend, hey, I'll be there by 4 o'clock. Well, if you know that traffic is totally sporadic and you know, maybe there's an accident. Well, if you know that assuming a perfect day, it only takes 30 minutes. Well, if there's no traffic, it's absolutely perfect and everything goes according to plan, you could leave at 3:30 and get there by 4. But more often than not, we plan ahead and we say, well, sometimes there's an accident on the highway, or, what if something pops up and there's a detour or there's construction or something like that. So we actually plan a margin for error and we leave by 3:15 and we give ourselves a 15-minute margin of error, a 15-minute buffer. Well, people should be doing the exact same thing for their financial investments. And that's a really good way to manage risk. Always have a margin of error. Or a margin of safety. So if we know that the market value of something is, say, $100, well, if we only pay $80 for it, we've created a margin of safety of 20%, a $20 margin of safety. So this is a really good strategy. If we know what something is worth, well, we want to create a margin of safety for ourselves in case we can't actually get what it's worth and we get a little bit less than that. So the three most important words in investing are margin of safety. That's Warren Buffett, margin of safety. If you know what something is worth, buy it for less than it's worth. Create a margin of safety for your investment. So an example of how you could think about this in terms of a tangible example, well, let's say that you're going to buy a rental property. And let's say that the house you believe is worth $200,000. Well, one way that you could create safety and manage your risk in this investment, don't buy it for what it's actually worth. Buy it for less than it's worth and create a margin of safety. So you would offer, let's say, and Warren Buffett's rule of thumb is always try to create or always invest with a 20% margin of safety. So for him, that means buying stocks that he believes or buying companies that he believes are 20% or are currently for sale for 20% less than he believes they're worth. Well, for us, simple example, a house, we believe it's worth $200,000. We're only going to offer $160,000. And at most pay $160,000. We always want to make sure that we have that buffer, because what if we can't get $200,000? What if we can only sell it for $190,000 or only rent it out at a value of $190,000 or $180,000? So we want to create a margin of safety for our investments. So then the third core strategy for managing our risk is hedging. Now, what hedging means, and some people, finance people, love to make hedging seem super complicated and intense and serious, and we do this all the time. We hedge our risk all the time in our lives. And the way that you can think of hedging is all you're doing is you're managing and reducing risk by purchasing insurance. So, simple example of how we hedge in our daily lives. Well, let's say that you buy a plane ticket for $300. Well, if you miss that plane ticket, or that if you miss the flight, I guess it would happen if you lost the plane ticket too, then you're screwed. But if you buy a flight for $300 and if you miss the flight, well, you've lost $300. You're out your entire investment. Or if the plane is canceled, the flight is canceled, sometimes they have in there that you lose your flight. You lose the money. So either way, that sucks. You're out $300. So what do most people do? Well, they buy travel insurance. And maybe it's $20. It's flight cancellation insurance. So really what you're doing is you're hedging your investment, because you're saying that I'm going to pay $20 so that if I miss the flight or if the flight is canceled, I get all of my $300 back. So that means that really the total amount of money you're risking is only $20. So in summary, you're paying $20 to protect yourself from the risk of losing $300. That is what hedging is. And people use hedging in their personal lives. They use it in their travel. They use it in their in terms of their family, life insurance, disability insurance. Like that's they're hedging risk, but then they also do it with their financial investments. Or we have the opportunity to do it with our financial investments if we so choose to. So hedging investments is a little more technical, but the philosophy is the same. You're buying insurance in case your higher risk investment doesn't work out. Now, if you're diversifying, are you going to hedge your diversification? Well, you can, but it's kind of like protecting something that's already kind of protected. So more often, and I'm not saying it's a good or bad idea, I'm just saying more often people will use hedging when they know that they're taking higher risk with one or several specific high risk investments or growth oriented investments. So, as an example, let's say that you're going to buy an investment property and then try to flip it or try to sell it. Well, that might be pretty high risk because what if you can't sell it? Or what if the value falls apart? So one way that you could hedge this using the exact same example that we used with the flight insurance is, so let's say that you know a house is worth $300,000 and you want to pay, or you do pay $280,000. So this is a pretty small margin of safety. So it's only $20,000 on a $280,000 investment. That's not a very large margin of safety. Ideally, you'd want more. So now let's say that the reason you bought this house is you want to try to sell it for $300,000. Well, if you paid $280,000 and you sell it for $300,000, you would make a profit of $20,000. But the risk is, what if you can't find a seller? What if you cannot sell the house for $300,000? Well, if you can't find a seller, then you're not going to make your $20,000, and then you better do something else with it. Otherwise, you're just going to lose the money. So if you can't sell it, then you're going to have to rent it, or find someone to live in it, or you live in it. But you're going to have to do something with it because you're out $280,000. So one way that you could hedge this is you find another investor, or you find someone else who's also interested in this investment. So maybe you found this property sooner or faster or earlier than they did. So they didn't even know about it, but you found it first. So you lock it in, you buy it, you now have this opportunity. Well, if you can find someone else who's also interested in it and would be willing to buy it from you as an investment, well, you go to that person and say, look, I'll sell you the option to buy my house from me for $5,000 at $285,000 price. So simpler stated, you're finding someone and saying, hey, I don't know if my investment's going to work out. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find a seller for $300,000. Well, actually, you wouldn't want to tell them this, but this is what you're thinking in your mind. And you're telling them that if I cannot find someone to buy this from me, I want the option to sell it to you for $285,000. So you're creating the option for yourself to sell it to this other person for $5,000. Or I'm sorry, for $285,000. Well, that person is looking at this house and saying, well, I think the house is worth $300,000. So you know what? If you want to sell it to me for $285,000, I can still make a $15,000 profit. Yeah, why would I not? That sounds interesting. Yeah. And then to make it even sweeter for them, you say, look, I'll pay you $5,000 to put that in contract, in writing, that if I want to, I will sell this house to you for $285,000. So you're locking that person in to buy it from you for $285,000, and you're paying them $5,000 to enter into that agreement with you. That's hedging. You're buying insurance. You paid $5,000 for insurance, and what if you can't find someone in the market to buy it for $300,000? Well, simple. Then you turn around and sell it to this other person who's your hedge, and you lose no money because you only paid $280,000. You paid $5,000 for your insurance, and you had someone else buy it from you for $285,000. So they bought it from you for $285,000. You put $285,000 in, so you lose nothing. You've hedged your high-risk investment. So if you can't find a buyer, you can sell it to the other investor and break even. That is an example of hedging a financial investment. So understanding how to reduce investment risk is crucial for your wealth generation. And I can't stress this enough, that it's consistent, long-term focus on positive cash generating and value increasing assets, investment assets, and we need to be able to manage the risk. So 4 principles for you for generating wealth. 1, we don't want to speculate. We want to be a value investor. So we want to focus on generating positive cash flows, value creation and capturing value, and we do not want to speculate or gamble on short-term future price increases because we cannot time or call the short term, and if we are trying to do that, we're playing poker against the world's best investors. And more often than not, we will lose that game. All right. So 2 is we want to always identify, understand, and reduce our risk. And we can maximize our usage of diversification, creating a margin of safety, as well as hedging. And then 3 is we want to reinvest our cash flow and our profits. So if your investments are paying you back money, you don't want to just take that money and then spend it or blow it on something stupid. What you want to do is take that money and reinvest it, because that's how you compound your money. And when you're compounding over the long term, that will build some serious wealth. So maximize the power of compounding by reinvesting your money for the long term. And then the 4th principle is systematically and consistently invest over the long term. So disregard short-term emotional decisions and fluctuations and craziness in the marketplace. Disregard short-term emotional decisions. Instead, what we want to do is we want to stick to our investment philosophy and our system for long-term consistent investing, because we know as long as we're buying, or as long as we're making money more than 50% of the time and losing money less than 50% of the time, over the long term, for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, we will generate and compound massive amounts of wealth. All right, so how to achieve financial freedom through the philosophy of waterfall financial management. So this is when I think about structuring personal finances and how to use your cash flow. This is something that I've created not only for myself and family members and helping friends and other people with their finances, but this is a fantastic structure for you to think through, how do I want to allocate my money, my cash? Now, again, this is just informational. This is for you to decide what to do with it. All right, so, and this is the philosophy too. We're not getting into specific strategies here. So the philosophy is you're going to be earning money from active income. And active income means that you're working for it. So maybe this is your 9-to-5 job or your own business, or you're doing something, but you're literally putting in time, energy, and labor to generate active money. So you're earning money from that. Then if you're going to do charity, I recommend putting that at the top. So before you consider anything else, if you want to set aside 1%, 0.5%, 2%, or more for charitable contributions, I recommend doing that at the very, set that money aside first. And now after that is you want to allocate a certain percentage to savings. So before you spend, before you do anything else with your money, if you're going to do charity, take care of that at the top. Then the next level of the waterfall, the next ledge of the waterfall, is savings. So X percent, maybe that's 2%, maybe it's 5%, maybe it's 10%. You determine what percentage goes to savings. But when you want to think about savings, the reason savings are so important are when you have more savings, you know that you're covered. You've managed risk. And when you've managed risk, you know that you can make decisions that other people cannot. So COL, where it says 12 to 24 months, cost of living runway goals. So COL is cost of living. Ideally, you want to create a savings account with enough money in there to cover your cost of living for 12 to 24 months. Now, coronavirus is a great example where, a sad example where a lot of people lost their jobs and they did not have savings to cover their cost of living. Or if they did, it was maybe only enough for a month or two. Well, then they're screwed. And if they can't find work, if they can't get that income, then they're stuck relying on the government. Well, the government was slow to release the stimulus checks. People started losing their houses. They were getting evicted. They weren't able to buy for food. There was craziness going on with the food pantries. So because a lot of people didn't have a cost of living savings, one, they exposed themselves to a massive amount of economic risk. You do not want to ever let that happen to you, your family. Also help your family and friends. Advise them to do this, but never allow yourself. This is a choice. It's your personal choice to decide, am I going to expose myself or not to massive amounts of economic risk? And I highly, think it's a good idea to put aside 12 to 24 months of cost of living. Now, so that's in terms of managing risk. Now, the other side of the equation, when you do have those savings, is you can make more strategic decisions that are long-term focused rather than short-term. If you're worried about eating in the next month, you can't make decisions that are focused on 12 months to 24 months out. But let's say that you're in a work or you're in a job or a position where you're really unhappy, and you know that it might take 3 to 6 months to really to do what you want to do, to transition to another company, to build your own business, to do something. If that's going to take a lot of time, well, if you know that you have 12 to 24 months in savings that can cover that period of time for you, well, let's say that you know that it's going to take 6 months to do whatever this risky decision is. If you have 24 months, that's only a quarter of your savings. You still have plenty of time to figure things out. And it's actually not that risky for you because you have the savings. So savings, a lot of people view it as, oh, it's a should do. Yeah, I know I should. It's not, whatever. And they keep procrastinating, putting it off. They're exposing themselves to massive amount of risks, and they'll never actually be able to take the higher risk strategic decisions that they need to make in order to achieve what they want in their life. So I can't stress enough, savings is super important. It's not just about, a rainy day fund and, toss a couple bucks in there. This is strategic. You want to do it. You need to do it. All right. So then after your savings is if you have high interest debt, you want to always allocate X% to paying down your high interest debt. Credit cards will eat you alive if you carry a balance on them. So credit cards are usually the high interest debt that most people suffer from. So a credit card, a lot of people don't know this, but credit cards have high APRs of anywhere between 15 to 25%. So what that means, a 25% APR, let's assume that at the beginning of the year, you have $100 on your credit card. Well, if you have a 25% APR, you're paying 25% interest over 12 months on your balance. So now, of course, and $100 is a bad example because you're going to be paying the minimum. So eventually you will, over that year, if it's only $100, the minimum is probably going to be $30. So you'll pay it off in like 3 or 4 months. But if you have $1,000 or $10,000, some people have 15, 20 grand credit card debt, they're paying an enormous amount of interest on that money. And the other caveat and something to be careful with is a lot of credit cards advertise 0% APR for 9 months, 12 months, or 15 months, or whatever time period. This catches some people off guard because they think that at the end of that 9 months or 12 months or 15 months that, then I'll start building interest. No. It blows up on you. And they retrospectively look back to the last, if it's 9 months, 12 months, or 15 months, they calculate all of the interest over that period and then slap it on in one day. And literally you could go from $10,000 or $5,000 in debt to instantly waking up with, if it's 25% and $10,000, well, you might wake up the next day with $12,500 of debt. And it blew up on you in one day. So if you're ever going to be using credit cards, one, you don't want to carry an interest. You don't want to carry a balance. Always be responsible with your credit cards. Pay down that cash, pay down the balance, and use it as, and we can talk later about this, but they do provide benefits, 1% cash back, 2% cash back, other benefits, whatever. That's great if you pay off your balance. But if you're paying 20% in interest on your balances, it doesn't matter that they're paying you 2% cash back. You are losing so much money in terms of the interest. You want to pay off your credit card balances. All right, enough on that, but I can't stress that is super important. Do not carry a high interest debt balance. It will eat your money alive. It will eat you alive. All right. So then after that, you want to allocate a specific percentage to investments. So investments is your security bucket, your growth bucket, and your dream bucket. Well, what are these? Well, a security bucket, think of this as long-term, diversified, compounding, consistent investment. So this is you thinking 10 years out, 20 years out, 30 years out, or actually I would say more like 20 to 30 years out. This is like retirement money. This is where it's low risk. You're following Warren Buffett's rule. You're not losing money. So you're making more money more often than you're losing money. And it's compounding over the long term, over 10, 20 years. So security is a long-term consistent compounding bucket for retirement. Now, that is the security bucket. You're also a good idea to do is also create a growth bucket, which is higher risk, but there's also higher returns, and it accelerates your wealth building. So maybe 90% of your investment money goes in a security bucket, but then you also set aside, 5% for growth and 5% for dream. Or maybe it's, 70% for security, 20% for growth, and then 10% for dream. So a growth means that might be, buying a real estate property or investing in a real estate fund that's higher risk, or investing in private businesses or a couple private investments or private loans. Like, they're higher risk, but they do offer higher returns. And that's a way to accelerate your money. But you don't want all of your money in high risk, high return investments, because again, you're exposing yourself to too much risk, and you don't want to do that over the long term with your retirement money. So there's a difference between kind of how to think about your retirement money, which is like the security bucket, but then there's the short term, high risk, high return growth money, which is if you think about wanting to retire or be very financially well off in the next 5 to 15 years, your security bucket's not going to get there, because your security bucket's really focused on like 20 to 30 years out through slow, consistent compounding. But maybe you want to start a business or invest in real estate or property or a small business or a private business or do private lending or something like that. Well, that's in the hope of making a large amount of money in the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. That's short term. Well, that's going to be higher risk, high return, and it will accelerate. But again, only 10 to 20, whatever percentage of your investment money you decide. But always make sure your security bucket's covered first, and then allocate a smaller portion of your investment money to the growth bucket, because you don't want to take too much risk with the money that you need long term to build your wealth. All right, and then the final bucket is a dream bucket. So this is money that you're setting aside for specific dreams, luxuries, experiences, or goals. So for example, I actually have a dream bucket that I consistently allocate money to for my wedding. And I also have, as a part of that, so it's like wedding / honeymoon. I know that's going to be expensive. So I'm slowly but surely setting money aside for that and letting that grow over time. But then I'm also setting aside money for other life goals. So a house in the future that I really want, or something like that. So for you, I guarantee that you probably have some type of goals or some type of specific luxury item that you want, or a really cool experience that you want that's going to be very expensive. Start setting aside money now, whether it's 1%, 2%, whatever. Set aside money and let that continue to grow. So that's the dream bucket. And then you want to allocate money to low interest debt. So these could be student loans. This could be a mortgage. So these interest rates could be anywhere from 2 to 5%, 2 to 6%. So much, much lower than the credit cards, which are number 4. That might be anywhere from 15 to 25%. So number 6 is you're allocating money to low interest debt like student loans or mortgages. And then finally, after that is you're allocating X percent or percentage of your money to cost of living. And then after your cost of living is the remainder of the money after that is for personal spending, discretionary spending, spending money on whatever you want, for fun, for entertainment, for, travel experiences, whatever. So the most important philosophy underlying this waterfall financial management is your money is kind of flowing down from ledge to ledge. So it starts with, I'm making money. Then the second ledge, am I contributing money to charity causes? If I am, what percentage? And then it drips down to the third ledge. How much money am I setting aside for savings? What percent? Then it drips down to the fourth ledge. How much money am I setting aside for high interest debt? Next ledge, how much money am I investing? Next ledge, how much money am I putting into my low interest debt? Next ledge, how much money am I putting into my cost of living? And then whatever's left over at the very bottom of the waterfall, that's what you actually have to personally spend. So you are investing before you're spending. You are investing before you're spending. You are investing before you're spending. This is so important. You're investing before you're spending. Investing before you're spending. This is how you do it. This is how you achieve financial freedom. This is how you achieve financial independence. You invest before you spend. so many people get caught up with, if they're making $50,000, their cost of living, they're literally spending money on personal spending and cost of living of like $40,000 or $50,000. They're literally spending all of their money. So they have nothing left over to invest. So because they have nothing left over to invest, or very little left over to invest, they never can kick off and compound their money. So they're stuck. And then they follow this trend all through their 20s, through their 30s. And then all of a sudden, their 40s, when they have a kid that's like 5 or 6 years old, they go, oh shit, I need to worry about retirement. I need to set money aside for my kid's education. I need to worry about, and then they literally go boom, boom, boom. They've lost 20 years of compounding. They've lost 10 years of compounding. And there's some people who don't figure this out until their 50s and 60s. There's some people who never figure this out at all. So the earlier, and some people, if you're listening to this and you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, maybe you're in your 60s, I don't know how old you are, but if you're listening to this, yes, of course, obviously hindsight is 2020. The best time you could have started was when we were 4, but we can't. And or 15 or 20 or 25, whatever. There's always, you could spend your whole life beating yourself up doing stuff that you should have done. The important thing is you now know. Invest before you spend. Wherever you are in your life, however old you are, the important thing is now, from here on out, you want to think through, I should and must invest before I spend. So, the next best time is today. That's how you want to be thinking about your money. I must invest before I spend. All right. So, I know I really beat that dead horse, but that is super, super important. Okay. Compound your investments to achieve financial freedom. So this is cash flow. This is what your money's going to be doing. It's going to start and then flow down into number 1 priority, number 2 priority, number 3 priority, number 4 priority, number 5 priority, blah, 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 until eventually whatever's left over. And if you're really tight on money, you literally might not have any money left over. That's okay because you're investing still. Life, if you're not making a lot of money, life might not be exactly how you want it. It might not be comfortable. You might not be able to go out to eat. You might be eating a lot of beans and rice. That's okay, as long as you're putting money aside and you're building a financially wealthy future for yourself, for your family, for your friends. So what we're doing is, as you're investing this money, and the example of this waterfall, so let's say this is $100. Well, if you have $100, the first part, so charitable contributions, if you want to set aside 1% to 2%, boom. The first $1 to $2 of your money would go to a charity. Or maybe you're putting it in a savings account and then you're going to allocate that at the end of the year. But just to make this easy, let's assume that you're not putting money aside for charity. All right, so let's say that your savings, 5%, allocate, just to make numbers easy, 5%. Well, this $100, this waterfall flows, you now have $100. The first $5 of your $100 immediately goes to your savings account. That's where 5% goes. $5 goes in there. And then you say, let's say that this is, all right, well, 10% goes to my high interest debt. Well, then you have $95 left. Well, then the next $10, because you said 10% of your 100, well, $10 is going to go to your high interest debt. So now you're left with $85. Well, let's say that you determine that 20% of your money is going to go to investments. Well, if you take 20% of $100, that means $20. So if you only have $85 left here and 20% of your 100 is going in, so $20 is invested, then at the end, after you invest your money, you're going to have $65 left. And then you're going to allocate X% to low interest debt. So maybe that's 5% or 10%. Let's do 10%. So then if you have 10% of $100, that's $10. Well, now you have $65 minus the $10. So $10 goes in there and you have $55 left for your cost of living. Now let's say that you spend 40% of your money on cost of living. All right, well then 40% of $100 is $40. So $40 you're spending on cost of living. So 55 minus the 45, I can't remember if I said 45 or 40. Either way, whatever's left over is going to be what you actually spend. So maybe that's $10 of your 100. Maybe that's $15 of your 100. Maybe it's 5 or nothing. But that is what I mean by waterfall financial management. You know what percent of your money is being allocated in what order of priority to all these different accounts. All right, so in terms of compounding, this money that you're putting aside for investing, this 20%, 15%, 30%, 40%, I mean, some people get really high with their percentages because they want to accelerate things. So this money's coming in and you're putting it into the investment account. Now, you're going to make a certain return on investment on that money. So if that's 5% or 10% or 8%, well, you're going to be making 5, 8, 10%, X percent on that money. And that's going to be generating cash flow and increasing in value. So we talked earlier about the two ways that you earn a return on investment. It's either through positive cash flow or through an increase in value, the increase in price. Well, what you want to do is as your investments make that money, you want to put it back into the account. You want to reinvest it. And through reinvesting, so if this is $100 and you're making 5%, this altogether is like 5% or $5. Well, you don't want to spend that $5. What you want to do is take that $5 and put it back in so you have $105. And then if you make 5% on $105 and you keep doing that over and over and over, you compound and accelerate your money. Now, you will eventually hit a point, and this is where everything comes together in terms of seeing and understanding how to achieve financial independence and financial freedom without ever having to work again. Eventually, you're going to hit a point where you have enough cash or enough money invested that when you make 5% or 7% or 10% on your money, whatever this return on your money is, you're going to be generating enough cash flow every year to cover your cost of living or the standard of living that you desire. So, as an example, let's say that all in your cost of living for rent, for food, for insurance, for travel, for everything, for haircuts, toothpaste, whatever, all of your cost of living, let's say it's like $30,000. Well, if your investments are spitting out cash flow and every single year you're earning $30,000 in cash from your investments, you now cover your cost of living forever. That's achieving financial independence, and you're doing it without working. That is how this game is played. You're literally creating a money machine. You're consistently investing money into this money machine, and this money machine keeps growing and growing and growing and growing and growing until eventually you're going to have so much money in this machine that when it's spitting out 5%, you're able to more than cover your cost of living or your standard of living. And the standard of living is what you want and desire, so that's financial freedom. Your cost of living is being able to literally just cover your expenses and cost of living, obviously. All right, so you're investing more earnings and you're consistently reinvesting cash flow from investments. So every single year when you're making this money, this 20%, 50%, 30%, this is getting consistently every single year, every month, you're putting that money into the cash machine over and over and over again. And as your cash continues to make more money, you're reinvesting it and accelerating this machine. So in terms of examples of what this might look like. So let's assume that you start with no money invested whatsoever. You have no money invested. And your monthly investment is $500. So every month for 30 years, you invest $500. Well, if you were to make 6.5% return on that investment over 30 years, at the end of 30 years, you would have $518,000. If you were to make 7.5% return on that money, you'd end up with, at the end of 30 years, with $620,000, 8.5% with $745,000. So this is you consistently. So this $500, that's like you putting in $500 here consistently over and over and over, and you're reinvesting the earnings. So every year you're putting in $500 and you're reinvesting the earnings. And this X percent ROI is 6.5, 7.5, or 8.5. Well, over 30 years, you'd end up with 518, 620, or 745,000. So now let's assume that at the end of 30 years, you say, okay, I'm done reinvesting. And now I'm just going to, rather than taking my 5% and reinvesting it, instead, I'm going to use my 5%. I'm going to spend my 5% because it can now cover my cost of living or now covered my standard of living. Well, if you have 745,000, so the very top, you've hit the top of your money machine because that was your goal, and whatever your goal is, that's up to you, and you design your life and what you want. But if let's say that you hit this goal and you're now getting 5% and you can spend that 5% on your living. Well, if you have 518,000 here at the top and you're making 5% on that, you're going to be generating about $26,000 annually. Well, for a lot of people, that'll cover their cost of living. Or what about $620,000? Well, $31,000, 5% annually. And then $745,000 total invested here at the top. Well, if you're making 5% on that, you're going to be annually getting a return of about $37,000 annually. So what if we were to juice up these numbers? All right, well, again, assuming you have nothing invested, you invest $1,000 a month for 30 years. Well, same scenario as before, 6.5, 7.5, 8.5. You're consistently contributing every single month over 30 years. You're reinvesting. And then at the end of 30 years, you decide, okay, I'm going to start taking this money, and rather than reinvesting it, I'm going to spend it. I'm going to cover my cost of living or my desired standard of living. Well, you would have 1 million, just over a million, so 1,036,000 at the end of 30 years if you're putting in $1,000 a month for 30 years. And then if you were to say, all right, now I'm going to earn 5% on that and spend it and cover my cost of living, you'd be making $52,000 passively. A lot of people can live pretty comfortably on that. And then for 7.5% is 1.24 million. So that's $62,000 a year. 1.5 million is $75,000 a year. And now let's see what it looks like if you juice it up even more. So $2,000 a month for 30 years. Well, for 6.5% over 30 years, you'd have 2,072,000, 73,000. Well, 5% of that at the end of 30 years, if you wanted to live off of the returns that it's spitting out, well, you'd end up with $140,000 annually. Or I'm sorry, $104,000 annually and passively. And then 7.5% would be roughly 2.5 million. So 5% on 2.5 million would roughly give you about $124,000 annually. And then finally, $149,000 annually. So what if we went even more? 4,000, we doubled the investment. So $4,000 a month for 30 years. Well, you'd end up with at the end of 30 years with 4.1 million, 4.9 million, or 5.9 million. And if you were to have that amount, you fill the money machine up 30 years, and you now have this level of investment in the money machine, and your money machine's producing 5% annually, well, you could annually, passively, get $207,000 annually, $248,000 annually, or about $300,000 annually. I hope you can see now how this game works. That is all financial freedom is. It is a game. And when you know how to play the game, you can absolutely win. So, to achieve financial freedom even faster, kind of like we saw here. So we started investing, the first example is 500. Well, let's juice that up. Let's hit 1,000. Let's do 2,000. Let's do 4,000. You keep feeding the monster. You keep feeding this machine, and you will get there faster. So to achieve financial freedom even faster, earn more money. And that is the whole purpose of this entire program. Is we've talked about if you love what you do, if you're fulfilled, if you know the mission of why you're doing, you will naturally bring a higher level of enthusiasm and energy and interest, and you will naturally outcompete other people. And then we talked about personal performance, maximizing your personal performance, your mindset, your fitness, your diet, and your sleep. If you perform at a higher level than other people, you will advance and accelerate your career and earn more money. And then we talked about how to get what you want, how to negotiate, how to continuously invest in yourself, your personal development to become more valuable, and then negotiate for your value, earn more money. Well, when you earn more money, you can invest more money. And number 2, limit your cost of living and your expenses. So a lot of people get into cost of living creep. They let this monster of expenses eat them. And you cannot let your cost of living eat your future. That is, so many people make this mistake. If they make, let's say that their cost of living is 30 grand and they're making 50 grand, well, the moment they make 60 grand, they bump their cost of living up to 40 grand. And then when they make 70 grand, they bump it up to 50 grand. And like, they're always eating the money that they need to invest. So if they're generating more cash flow from their career, well, then they start spending more. And they've reversed the waterfall. They're spending before they're investing. You cannot let that happen. So what you want to do is limit your cost of living so that as you consistently make more money and you've limited your cost of living, so let's say earning more money, let's say you're making $100,000 today and your cost of living is $50,000. And I'm just using this for easy numbers. Well, the difference between these two is $50,000. Well, that leaves you a lot of money to invest. Now, if you were to limit your cost of living to $50,000, but now you negotiate, you get a promotion, you're doing really well in your career, all of a sudden you're now making $120,000. Well, if you've limited your cost of living, rather than $50,000, you now have $70,000 difference to invest. And you get to accelerate how quickly and how much you invest into your cash machine. So limit the cost of living and invest the expanding difference. Now, what these numbers are for you, that is totally up to you. Your cost of living is your choice. Now, one of the ways that I think about it, and personally how I know I'm going to be focusing on this, is I'm going to set a max cost of living. So I'm not there yet. But let's say, and again, let's just use simple numbers. So let's say that this desired cost of living is 50 grand. So that's a number I think that is reasonable for most people, or 30 grand, 40 grand, 50 grand, whatever. So let's say this desired is 50. Well, let's say that your current cost of living is 30. Well, you want a better lifestyle. You want a better apartment. You want to be able to go out to restaurants. You want to have nicer clothing. You want to, there's a certain expense and cost of living threshold that you desire, and you're not there yet. Okay, well, as you advance and you continue making more money in your career, well, you have these set percentages. I'm putting X percent aside no matter what and those percentages stay fixed. So if you're making a certain amount of money, it doesn't matter. If you make more money, the percentages allocated to your waterfall don't change. The percentages stay fixed. So you can see this invested amount of income, this green, stays roughly the same over this period because the allocation percentage stays the same. So if this is 20%, every single year, even though you're making more money, 20% stays invested. But eventually here in year 13, you can see red hits this max expenses cost of living. So in this example, let's just call it 50 grand. Well, as you continue making even more money in the future, your cost of living stays at 50 grand. And this expanding difference between you're making more income, but you're not spending more, that difference, you're reinvesting the difference. You're investing the expanding difference. Well, what that's going to do to your wealth generation is you can see in year 13, that's when you maxed your expenses. So all of a sudden you can see a jump in invested income, in reinvested returns. And then from there on, it accelerates the growth. So that is, a lot of people fall prey to cost of living creep. They let their expense and cost of living monster eat their financial wealth, their future retirement. They let their cost of living destroy their financial freedom. And you cannot let that happen to you. So set a bar, set a max cost of living that you're happy with, that you're comfortable with, that you desire. But from that point on, of course, continue making more money. But you set a ceiling for your cost of living. All right, so in part 2, everything up until this point that we've covered so far in part 1 has been focused on the core philosophy and the underlying mindset and approach to building financial freedom. In part 2, we're going to break down a little bit more of the core strategy and actual things that you can do to implement and start putting into practice for your life. And we'll also discuss, step by step, how to set up that waterfall financial management system for your life and your personal finances. So last thing I want to cover in this part 1 is credit score. And a lot of people have an idea of their credit score, or they think it's important, but they're not really sure. And they're like, oh, 700, 8, whatever. What's the difference? I have a credit score. It is a huge difference. I cannot stress enough how important this is. So please, please, please listen, take notes, write down thoughts, quite anything. But your credit score is so much more important than you probably think. So the credit score ranges are from poor to excellent. And most people, this graph says 900. It's more often than not, it's 850. At least that's what most of the credit agencies show. But poor is 300 to 574. Below average is 575 to 659. Fair is 660 to 712. Good is roughly, 713 to 740. A lot of people say 700 to 750. And then excellent is 741 to 900. Again, this is a little too specific. I would say most credit agencies, most lenders, most banks, most people say, if you have 750 plus, we put you in excellent, but we're not just excellent. We are fantastic. We're outstanding. Shoot for 800. 800 is your goal. If you have less than 800, you should be asking yourself, why am I less than 800? I need to get to 800. All right. So there are 5 variables that affect your credit score. And this is coming from, you can see here, source, Experian. So this is not me coming up with any of this stuff. And also, just in terms of this entire presentation and everything in this module for Module 12, Financial Freedom, this is not stuff that I randomly came up with. So the only thing in this entire presentation or this entire module that I personally developed myself was the waterfall financial management system. But in terms of the investment philosophies and how to diversify risk, how to hedge, all that stuff is stuff that I've spent thousands of hours understanding and researching from the world's best investors. So this is not stuff that I'm coming up with myself. All right, so similar here, these variables and stuff, I'm not coming up with this. This is from Experian, which is one of the 3 credit bureaus. So the very first variable, which is the most important variable, the heaviest weighted, 35%, is going to be your payment history. Have you missed payments, or do you have a perfect payment history? The second thing, 30%, is your credit use ratio. Now, what a credit use ratio is you can see it's a ratio that's calculated using this small little formula here on the bottom. So, revolving credit balance over total revolving credit available. Now, I want to give an example of what this means. So, a total revolving credit available. So let's say you have, again, making numbers easy here. Let's say you have 5 credit cards, and each credit card has a $1,000 credit limit. Well, or actually, let's make it more realistic. Let's say you have 5 credit cards and a $5,000 credit limit. Well, your total revolving credit available is 5 times 5,000, so 25,000. You have $25,000 available. Well, how much of a balance are you carrying on those credit cards? Do you have $5,000 outstanding? Are you carrying a $5,000 credit balance on your revolving credit? Or are you carrying $15,000 on your $25,000? Or are you carrying $20,000 on your $25,000? Some people will literally max out their credit cards and then let that sit. They are destroying their credit score. So again, as I talked about, just in terms of APR and how much interest you're paying, you don't want to carry a balance on your credit card because it just eats your money so horribly. And then the other thing is, by not carrying a balance, you pretty much have a perfect score for this variable. Now, of course, the credit cards do want to see that you use their credit cards. You don't want to not use your credit cards. You want to use them, but then always pay them off at the end of the month. So you're not carrying a balance. So kind of the 30-30 rule is essentially saying that ideally always do your best or always try to have less than 30% credit utilization. So again, if this is $10,000 denominator, well, if you have a total of $10,000 available, you're carrying a balance of less than $3,000. That's credit, and lenders want to see the 30%, less than 30% utilization, because that means you're not at risk of going, whoop, I can't pay, and then they're screwed. Okay, so then you have the third variable, which is credit history length. So they take into account your oldest credit account, your newest credit account, and the average age of all of your credit accounts. So you do want to have credit accounts open because you need to build that credit history. That's one of your variables. And then the fourth variable is what they call credit mix. So really what they're trying to understand here is, can you responsibly manage multiple different types of credit? So you might have credit cards, you might have student loans, a car loan, a mortgage, maybe you have a personal loan or some other type of loan. So for example, like, do you have a phone loan? If you have a phone payment plan through Apple or through any of the other companies, well, those payment plans are actually through lenders. So, and I mean, when I think about my iPhone plan right now, well, I'm paying 0%, so it's a 0% loan, but it actually is a loan through a lender. Well, that means that is going to be attached to my credit history. So if I miss a phone payment, well, that's negatively going to affect my credit score because it is a type of credit. So lenders want to know, are you responsibly paying off all of your loans across multiple different types? And they want to see you are a responsible user of credit, of borrowed money. And then the final variable, which is also 10%, is new credit. So how often are you asking for access to more money? If a credit lender or someone or like a bank, if they see that you're only asking for one new line of credit a year, they'd be like, oh, that's not bad at all. But let's say that you go in for a mortgage and the bank pulls your credit history and they see that you've asked to pull out 6 credit cards in the last year. Well, that bank's going to go, you're borrowing a lot of money, and that scares me. That's going to reduce your credit score. So the more that you constantly ask for more money, the more inquiries that you ask for, it dings, it reduces your credit score because credit people, lenders, they see that as a red flag. Why are you asking for so much money? Are you desperate? And if you're desperate, they know that increases the risk that you will not be able to pay them back. So want to keep that lower, and we'll talk about that. So our credit score determines the interest rate that we pay on our loans or on our borrowed money. Now, the reason this is so important is your credit score and the interest rate that you pay massively affects your wealth, your long-term wealth generation. So to make this, just to put this in a context so you can see how important this is. A lot of people, financial gurus and people who are saying, this is what you need to do to become wealthy. They literally say, like, don't buy Starbucks coffee or don't buy coffee every day. Well, a coffee every day, let's assume it's Starbucks too, so it's expensive coffee every day. And I practically want to die and choke when I see people are spending $3.50 consistently for coffee because personally, I don't think their coffee is that good. I think there's better coffee you can get or better coffee you can make yourself for less than $3.50 a day. But anyways, besides the fact. So let's say you buy coffee for $3.50 daily for 30 years. You are buying that on Christmas, on 4th of July. You never miss a day. Always putting out $3.50. Or you go and buy a house for $250,000 and you pull out a 30-year mortgage. Well, let's compare these two. If you have a home mortgage, so I'm going to walk through this. So let's say the house is worth $250,000. That's the sales price or the sale price. So you pull out a 30-year mortgage. Well, you're not going to pull out a mortgage on the entire price because more often than not, you're going to need to put a certain amount of cash down. So if you do, let's just say you put down 20% cash. Well, 20% is going to be about $50,000. So you put down $50,000 of your own cash. So if you're putting down the cash, you don't need to borrow the money. So that means that you need to borrow $200,000 to buy this house. Well, you're going to do that from borrowing from the bank. That's what a mortgage is. You're borrowing money from a bank to buy a house. So this $200,000, you're going to be paying interest on it over 30 years, which is the term. Now, there's 15-year mortgages and there's 30-year mortgages. So if you're paying a 5% interest rate on your 30-year mortgage, you're going to pay a total, and this is not total payment, this is total interest. You're going to pay $186,000 in interest over 30 years. And then if you do a 4% interest rate, so same scenario, but because you have a better credit score, the bank sees you as a better, more responsible borrower. Well, rather than charging you 5% interest, they might only charge you 4%. Well, if you're only paying 4%, that 1% change in interest rate could save you $43,000 over 30 years, because you'd be paying $143,000 in interest rather than $186,000. But what if it gets even better? What if you're only paying 3% interest rate? Well, then you're only paying roughly $103,000, $104,000 in interest over 30 years. So because of your credit score, if you can save 2% in your interest rate, you can literally save as much as $83,000. I mean, and this is only a $250,000 house. Imagine if this is a $300,000 house, a $400,000, $500,000 house, $1 million house. The amount of money that you can save by having a good credit score and having a better interest rate for your mortgages, for a boat loan, for your any really large purchase that you make and you need to borrow money for it, that's going to affect your interest rate, and your interest rate will always be determined by your credit score. So by getting lower interest rates for really large purchases, you are saving yourself tens, if not most likely hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. So 5%, the total payment, including your purchase price as well as the interest, $386, $343, $303. So you're saving an enormous amount of money. And now coffee, if you were to buy coffee for $3.50 for 30 years, your total payment's only $40,000, $40,500. That, I hope, puts it into perspective how massively your credit score affects your financial wealth. So the difference between a 5% and a 3% mortgage is, and this is just this example, $83,000 in this example. A daily cup of coffee for $3.50 for 30 years is about $40,000, more than $40,000. So your credit score is unbelievably important for wealth generation, and anybody who just blows off their credit score, they don't understand the gravity of how impactful a credit score is on your long-term financial wealth, on your financial independence, on your financial freedom. So credit score best practices are: 1, pay all of your bills on time. If you have an always use auto pay for your student loans, for rent, for mortgage, car loans, credit cards. Literally just put everything on auto pay. So even if you forget to pay the whole balance off, at least you always, no matter what, hit the minimum payment, because you never ever want to miss a payment. Always have and use 2 to 3 credit cards responsibly. And the reason for that is you do need to build a credit history. So some people are terrified of credit cards. Well, you cannot be afraid of a tool. That's all a credit card is. It is a financial tool. And if, just like a hammer, if you screw up using a hammer and you slam your thumb, yeah, that's going to suck. Same thing with a credit card. If you don't know how to use the tool properly, you're going to hurt yourself. So always have and use 2 to 3 credit cards responsibly. It will improve your credit mix, while also it improves your credit utilization ratio, which was the second largest factor, where we want to focus on the 30-30 rule. So it's going to increase that. So use them responsibly, which means always try to pay off your monthly balances. Do not carry a balance on your credit cards. Maintain a balance of less than 30% of your total credit line available. Well, if you pay off your credit cards, you won't even have to worry about that. And then apply for 2 or fewer lines of credit annually, which are hard inquiries on your credit report. So hard inquiries stay on file for 2 years. So that's important to know. And then finally is do not close old or rarely used credit cards or credit lines for several reasons. One, by keeping them open, it increases your average age of your credit lines, which was one of the variables. But then also, you might have, an available credit line of $2,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 on the credit card. Well, that's going to increase the denominator for your credit use ratio. So it's still good and healthy to keep them open. Always use them responsibly. And even if you're not going to use them at all, maybe it's some, stupid, credit card that you open up at a department store. Well, if you don't think you're ever going to use it again, maybe spend, $15 on it, $20 on it per year, pay it off, and then use it strategically to increase your average age of credit while also keeping your denominator high for the credit use ratio. So in summary, again, the 35% of your credit history is based on payment history. So never, ever miss your payments. Auto pay, auto pay, auto pay, auto pay, auto pay. Put everything on autopay. It is your best friend. Awesome. So I know this was a longer video, but I really, from the bottom of my heart, I hope this was super helpful and enlightening. And I hope you can absolutely see for yourself how you absolutely can achieve financial freedom, financial independence. You now know the philosophy, you understand how the game is played, and you see visually how people achieve this. Long-term, consistent investments, you're reducing and managing risk, and you're always making more money over the long term than you're losing money. You're playing the same game as casinos, and you do it for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. So I'm excited for you to keep thinking about this. Jot down, again, if you have any notes or thoughts or questions for your own research, but then also if we're working one-on-one, then we can talk about this. And I'm excited to dive into part 2 of this module. And in part 2, we're going to start breaking down the core strategies and several ways that you can actually start to take this philosophy and implement it step by step into your life. So that's it for part 1, and I will see you in part 2.